Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the kingdom of Fairies, blood was everything. The purity of one's lineage defined status, wealth, and even the worth of a person. Nobility ran in the veins of the royal family and the aristocrats that surrounded the court, while those of mixed blood were cast aside, considered an aberration against nature. Ed had grown up with this brutal reality. He stood quietly at his post near the towering columns of the royal palace, clad in the armor of a royal guard. His dark hair was tied back, and his green eyes scanned the gathering in the grand ballroom, where music and laughter mingled in the air. Royals and nobles danced and conversed, their glittering attire a stark contrast to the simplicity of Ed's uniform. Tonight was a grand celebration, one of the many held to showcase the wealth and power of the kingdom. But for Ed, it was a reminder of the world he could never truly belong to. He had been raised in the shadows, his mother exiled for the crime of bearing a child with a commoner. His father, unknown to him, had left long before he could remember. All Ed knew was that his blood, tainted by the mingling of two classes, was something that could get him killed. His only chance of survival had been to hide it. The role of a palace guard had given him proximity to the royal family and protection under their service. But every day was a gamble. If anyone discovered the truth, the consequences would be dire. As Ed watched the dancers move in unison, his gaze was drawn to the figure at the center of attention, Princess Celeste. She was everything the kingdom revered: beautiful, graceful, and most importantly, of pure royal blood. Her golden hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her deep blue gown sparkled with diamonds as she twirled in the arms of yet another noble suitor. Celeste's laughter rang out, but it was hollow, as if she played her part too perfectly. Ed had always admired her from afar, not daring to dream that they could ever be more than distant figures in each other's lives. She represented everything unattainable, everything forbidden. And yet there was something about her that called to him, something in the way she carried herself, as if the weight of her royal status was a burden she could never fully escape. Suddenly, the lights in the grand ballroom flickered and a cold breeze swept through the hall. The music faltered and a hush fell over the crowd as the doors at the far end of the room burst open. A figure cloaked in black darted through the crowd, moving with inhuman speed toward the princess. Ed's instincts kicked in without thinking. He abandoned his post and raced across the ballroom, his hand reaching for the sword at his side. The assassin's blade gleamed in the dim light as it arced towards Celeste, but Ed was faster. He threw himself between the attacker and the princess, his sword clashing against the assassin's weapon with a resounding clang. Pain shot through his arm as the force of the blow jarred his bones, but he held firm. The crowd erupted into chaos, nobles screaming and rushing to the exits as the guards scrambled to restore order. Ed struggled against the assassin, his body moving on pure adrenaline. The figure was skilled, far more so than any opponent he had faced in training. Ed's muscles burned as he parried another blow, his feet sliding across the marble floor. Just when he thought his strength would give out, the assassin overreached, leaving a small opening. Ed seized the moment, driving his sword into the assailant's side. A choked gasp escaped the assassin's lips, and they crumpled to the floor, clutching their wounds. Blood pooled around them as their hood fell back, revealing a young man with wild eyes, his face contorted in pain. "Traitor!" The man spat at Ed, his voice weak. "On you protect a system that will never accept you." Ed stared down at the dying assassin, heart pounding. How could this man know? He was supposed to be just another palace guard, invisible in the crowd. But before he could ask, the man's body went still, his life slipping away. A soft voice cut through the chaos. "Are you hurt?" Ed turned to find Princess Celeste standing before him, her blue eyes wide with concern. She was untouched, her gown still immaculate, but there was a tremor in her voice that betrayed her fear. "I'm fine, Your Highness," again replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. He sheathed his sword and stepped back, bowing his head respectfully. "So it's on my duty to protect you." Celeste's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than it should have, her brow furrowed. "You saved my life," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "I want to forget this." Before Ed could respond, the captain of the guard appeared, barking orders to secure the area and investigate the attack. Ed was dismissed, but as he left the ballroom, he could feel Celeste's eyes on him, a weight that pressed on him more heavily than his armor. The days that followed were tense. The court was buzzing with rumors of who had ordered the assassination attempt and why. The royal family doubled their security, and the nobles were quick to distance themselves from any suspicion. Ed kept to his duties, his encounter with the princess replaying in his mind. He tried to push it aside, convincing himself that it had been nothing more than a brief moment of gratitude, but every time he caught a glimpse of Celeste in the palace halls, his heart betrayed him. He knew it was dangerous to entertain such thoughts. She was royalty, untouchable, and he was nothing worse than nothing. In fact, if anyone knew the truth about his bloodline, he just be dismissed, he would be executed. And yet, despite the danger, he couldn't help but feel a connection to her, something deeper than the loyalty he owed to his duty. One evening, as Ed was patrolling the palace gardens, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword, but relaxed when he saw who it was. Princess Celeste stood before him, her golden hair illuminated by the soft glow of the moonlight. "Your Highness," Ed, bowing low, "is there something you need?" Celeste stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "You've been avoiding me today," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ed tensed. "I would never avoid my duty, princess." "That's not what I mean," she replied, taking another step forward. "You saved my life, and yet you've acted as though nothing happened." He didn't know how to respond. How could he explain that every time he saw her, he was reminded of everything he could never have? How could he tell her that he had no right to stand beside her, let alone speak to her?
"It's my duty to protect you, Eddie," I'd repeated, his voice tight.
"You're nothing more." Celeste frowned, her gaze piercing terror. "I don't believe that." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night air was cool, and the scent of jasmine filled the garden. But Ed felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them. He couldn't look away from her, couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her, even though he knew it was wrong. "You read different," Celeste said finally, her voice soft. "Farhad, I know what it is, but there's something about you, something that doesn't fit with the rest of the court." Eddie's heart raced. She was too close to the truth, closer than anyone had ever been. He could feel the walls he had built around himself beginning to crack, but he couldn't tell he let them fall. Not now, not ever. "You should go back inside, Your Highness," he said, his voice strained. "It's not safe out here." Celeste didn't move. "I am not afraid." "Free," she whispered, her gaze locked on his. Ed swallowed hard for a moment. He considered telling her everything about his mother, about his bloodline, about the secret that could destroy them both. But before he could speak, a rustle in the bushes caught his attention. He turned sharply, drawing his sword, but saw nothing. Still, the moment was broken. "Please," said his voice firmer this time. "For your safety, return to the palace." Celeste hesitated, but then nodded, her expression unreadable. As she turned to leave, Ed felt a pang of regret, but he pushed it aside. There could be no future for them, not in a world where blood was everything. Days passed, and Ed tried to forget the tension of that night in the garden. But it was impossible. Celeste's words haunted him, and her presence seemed to linger in every corner of the palace. He found himself constantly on edge, afraid that someone would notice the way his eyes followed her, or worse, that someone would discover the truth about his bloodline. Then one morning, everything changed. Ed was summoned to the throne room, an unusual request for someone of his rank. The towering doors of the chamber loomed ahead, and as he entered, he felt the eyes of the assembled nobles and courtiers on him. At the far end of the room sat the king, his cold gaze fixed on Ed. Beside him stood Princess Celeste, her expression unreadable. But it was the man standing just in front of her that drew Ed all attention, a nobleman dressed in the finest silk, with a smug smile on his lip. Ed had seen him before. Lord Marius, one of the most powerful men in the court, known for his ambition and ruthless tactic. "Your Majesty," Ed said, bowing low. "You summoned me." The king's voice was sharp, filled with authority. "There are troubling rumors circulating in my court. Guard, Ed. Lord Marius has brought forth accusation." Ed's heart pounded in his chest. He kept his face neutral, his mind racing. Had someone discovered his secret? Had Marius somehow learned of his mixed blood? He glanced at Celeste, but she did meet his eye. Lord Marius stepped forward, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Your Majesty, I have reason to believe that this man, this guard, is not who he claims to be. His presence in the palace poses a grave danger to the royal family, especially to the princess." The room was silent, tension hanging in the air. Ed could feel the weight of every gaze upon him, judging, waiting. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, his knuckles turning white. This was it. His secret was about to be revealed. "What is your evidence, Lord Marius?" asked the king, tone calm but dangerous. Marius smiled, savoring the moment. "I have it on good authority that this man's bloodline is tainted. He is not of noble birth. In fact, he carries the blood of a commoner and something else, something far more dangerous." A murmur spread through the court. Eddie's pulse quickened. He had to think fast. "My bloodline is none of your concern," Anna said, his voice steady. "I am loyal to the crown, and I have served the royal family with honor." "Loyalty," Marius scoffed. "Right, what loyalty can a man of tainted blood have to the crown? How can we trust someone who hides his true nature?" The king's gaze shifted to Ed, cold and calculating. "Terry, do you deny these accusations?" Ed stood tall, his mind racing for a response, but before he could speak, Celeste stepped forward. "Father," she said, her voice firm but respectful, "Hallory, this man saved my life. He has proven his loyalty time and time again. I will not stand by and let baseless accusations destroy him." Eddie's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Celeste was putting herself at risk for him, and that only made the situation more dangerous. The king's gaze softened slightly as he looked at his daughter, but he turned back to Marius. "Thais, do you have proof of your claims, Lord Marius?" Marius' smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Proof not yet, your majesty, but I assure you I will find it." "Then find it," the king said, his voice like iron. "Until then, this guard remains in my service." Marius bowed deeply, his expression tight with barely concealed frustration. "There as you wish, your majesty." The tension in the room lessened, and the court began to disperse. Ed stood still, his mind racing. Marius hadn't he been able to prove his claims? But it was only a matter of time. The nobleman would stop at nothing to expose him. He needed to act fast. As the courtiers filed out of the throne room, Celeste approached him. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a storm of emotion. "You should have told me," she said quietly. Ed swallowed hard. "I didn't want to put you in danger." "You were in danger." "Now," she replied, her voice tight with frustration. "Marius will not stop until he destroys you. You need to leave the palace." Ed shook his head. "I can trust if I leave. It will only confirm his suspicion." Celeste hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Then we need to find a way to protect you. I can try to us." She cut herself off, her voice thick with emotion. "Icon, to lose you." Her words hit Ed like a blow. He had spent so long convincing himself that their relationship was impossible, that their worlds were too far apart. But now, standing in front of her, he realized that she felt the same way. They were bound by more than duty or loyalty. They were bound by something deeper, something neither of them could deny any longer. "I'll find a way," Ed had said softly. Celeste nodded, but there was fear in her eyes. "Tara, be careful, Ed, please." As she turned and walked away, Ed felt the weight of the world on his shoulder. His secret was on the verge of being exposed, and the kingdom's entire social order could be thrown into chaos if the truth came out. But more than that, Celeste was at risk. If Marius discovered how close they had become, he would use it to destroy them both. Ed knew what he had to do. That night, he slipped away from the palace, avoiding the patrols with practiced ease. He moved through the dark streets of the city, heading for the old part of town where his mother had once lived. It had been years since he had set foot in the narrow, winding alleys, but he remembered the way well. His heart pounded as he approached a small, dilapidated house tucked away from the main road. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and the smell of dust and decay filled the air. Inside, everything was as he had left it, old furniture covered in sheets, the walls crumbling with age, but he wasn't tied here for memories. He was here for answers. In the corner of the room, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, was a small wooden box. Ed knelt down and pried it open, revealing the papers his mother had left behind. Letters, documents, old records, all of them hinted at a hidden truth about his bloodline. His mother had always been cryptic about their family history, but now Ed understood why. Among the papers was a letter written in his mother's hand. His eyes skimmed the familiar words until they landed on a phrase that sent a chill down his spine, towered the prophecy of the mixed blood ruler. Eddie's breath caught in his throat, a prophecy. His mother had mentioned it once long ago, but he had thought it was nothing more than a story. Now, as he held the letter in his hands, he realized that it was real. The kingdom's son's future was tied to his bloodline in ways he had never imagined. But the prophecy was vague, filled with cryptic language and ancient symbols. It spoke of a ruler who would unite the divided classes, but it didn't say how, and it didn't say when. Ed's mind raced. If Marius discovered the prophecy, he would twist it to his advantage, using it to turn the court against Ed. But if Ed could find a way to fulfill it, if he could prove that his mixed blood was not a curse but a blessing, he might be able to save himself and Celeste. But time was running out.